Hello and welcome back to Clarkenomics. In this final discussion of demand elasticity, we're going to talk about the things that determine whether something will be demand elastic or demand inelastic. The first thing we have to talk about here is just a reminder of what price elasticity of demand is all about. It's sensitivity to price. How sensitive are consumers to a change in the price of a good? If they really change their quantity demanded because of a price change, we'd call them sensitive, right? That would be an elastic demand. If they don't really change their quantity demanded when the price changes, we'd say that they're demand inelastic. They're insensitive to that price change. So the first factor that affects demand elasticity is the availability of substitutes. Remember from a previous video that substitutes are goods that can be used in place of each other. So if a product has a large number of close substitutes, things that consumers can easily swap out for it, then the demand is generally going to be more elastic. So let's think about why. When the price of a product rises, people can easily switch to another product, a substitute in its place. That's going to result in a large decrease in the quantity demanded of that product. So for instance, picture a gas station, right? Shell gasoline. Now you see one picture of one gas station, but imagine this is like an intersection with multiple gas stations. If this gas station raises its price, people can easily just go across the street. So consumers are going to be very sensitive to a change in price. You probably know people like this. Maybe your parents are like this. Even if the price is only different by like 1 or 2 cents per gallon, people will change which gas station they actually go to. So Shell gasoline would have a very elastic demand because there's a lot of substitutes. There's a lot of other brands of gasoline that people can get instead. On the other hand, imagine a product with fewer substitutes, like there's not very many things people could buy in its place. These types of goods generally have a less elastic demand because when the price of a product like this rises, people don't have very many options. They can't just switch to another substitute instead. So you're going to see a smaller decrease in the quantity demanded for that thing. An example of this would be gasoline in general. So it sounds like the same thing, but we're not talking about a brand of gasoline, we're just saying gas. When the price of gas rises, you still need to buy gas. You could switch to an electric vehicle or something like that, but in the short run especially, you're going to need gas and you're just going to have to suck it up and pay the higher price for gasoline. So even if the price of gas rises, the decrease in quantity demanded for gas isn't going to be that great. Some people might change their behavior, walk more, bike more, those types of things. But generally speaking, the quantity demanded of gasoline won't change that much as a result of a change in the price. So availability of substitutes is one of the biggest things that dictates whether a good will be more elastic for demand or less elastic for demand. Another thing is time. Time constraints matter quite a bit when people are making decisions. So imagine you need something right away. Can't wait. It's urgent. You need it right now. The demand for something like that is going to be less elastic. In other words, you're not going to be very sensitive to the price change or the price in general of like an ambulance ride. If you're horribly injured and they bring an ambulance, you're not going to stop and say, whoa, how much is this going to cost, right? You're just going to get in the ambulance and get the help that you need. So you're not going to be very price sensitive because you need this now. You can't wait and shop around. On the other hand, let's say something is not so urgent. You have more time to decide. If that's the case, your demand is going to be more elastic. So whereas an ambulance trip for like an emergency surgery might be demand inelastic, cosmetic surgery, right, which is not necessary in most cases, is going to become more elastic, right? You don't need this urgently. You can shop around, price things out, and you're going to make your decision much more based on price. You'd be very price sensitive to something like that. Whereas in an emergency situation, you're not so sensitive to the price. So time also matters because, when there's more time, it's easier to find substitutes. So time and substitutes are somewhat related in that regard. Next, share of income spent. So imagine that something takes up a small share of your budget, right? It's not very expensive to you. That's going to be something that is going to have a less elastic demand for you at those low prices. So for instance, picture chewing gum. Chewing gum is pretty cheap. You go to the store, you see it by the checkout line, doesn't take up a large share of most people's income. If the price of gum were to double, you probably wouldn't care that much. In fact, if you make enough money, you probably wouldn't even notice. right? So you're not really going to change your gum consumption based on the price of gum. It's just something you buy, it is the price that it is, and you don't really care about the price. But on the other hand, if a good takes up a large share of your budget, your demand is going to be more elastic for that thing. So, like a car. For most people, a car payment takes up a large share of their budget. So, if the price of a car were to double, you're definitely going to change your buying behavior in terms of cars. Whereas with gum, if the price were to double, you might not care so much. Now, this is going to be a little bit different for everybody because everybody's got a different budget, right? So my pack of chewing gum, which is cheap to me, might be like a car to a billionaire. A billionaire wouldn't really care if the price of a car doubled because to them, that's a small share of their budget. So if something takes up a large share of your budget, it's going to have a more elastic demand. If it's a smaller share of your budget, it's going to have an inelastic demand. Okay, next. Necessity. How much do you need this thing? So if there's a type of product that you don't really need, but it would be nice to have, we're going to call that a luxury product. And luxury products tend to have a more elastic demand because consumers are going to be sensitive to the price. Why are they going to be sensitive to the price? Well, they don't really need this thing. So a good example would be like a gaming console. They're nice to have. There's lots of awesome stuff you can do with them, but you don't need them. And so you're going to have a more elastic demand. You're going to be more price sensitive for something like that. So you might shop around a little bit more. If it's something that's a necessity, you cannot go on without it. Your demand is going to be much less elastic. So a good example of something that has a pretty inelastic demand for this reason might be insulin. So if you're diabetic, you need insulin to survive. The price of insulin can rise, it can fall, but you're probably still going to buy relatively the same amount of insulin. So you are insensitive to the price of insulin as far as your income will allow. Now, one of the things to note here is that there are some things that I think all of humanity would agree are necessary and things that people would all agree are luxuries, but some things people define differently. So everyone defines necessity a little bit differently. And a good example of this is like cigarettes. Some people don't smoke, so even if they were looking at cigarettes, they'd be pretty price sensitive. It wouldn't be hard for them to get priced out of buying cigarettes. But for other people who are addicted to smoking because of the addictive nature of cigarettes and nicotine and all that, for them, they might view that as a necessity. They might view that as like food. And so they're going to have a pretty inelastic demand for cigarettes, right? If you're addicted to a product, the price of that product can rise and rise and rise, but because you're addicted, you're still going to consume more or less the same quantity. So you're price insensitive just because of the nature of like addiction. Sad stuff. Now, in the real world, it's good to kind of talk about some of these things not from a theoretical standpoint, but like based on data that we have. So things that have been found to be generally inelastic products are things like eggs. This is like a household staple, right? Most households regularly buy eggs. They're used to it. They're price insensitive. They're not basing their decision to buy or not buy eggs on the price. Generally inelastic. Beef, there's another one. Gasoline, as we talked about. These things all have an elasticity of less than 1. In real life, things that are elastic might include something like housing. Houses cost a lot of money, right? And so because they take up a large share of most people's budgets, that's the reason why housing is elastic. Restaurant meals. That's something that's not really a necessity so much as it is a luxury. So restaurant meals have a pretty elastic demand. And airline travel. Probably more personal airline travel, right? Not for business necessarily, but people usually travel for recreation. That's more of a luxury product, and that's why that has an elastic price elasticity of demand. So it's good to apply some of these concepts to some real world stuff so that you can see how this works. Thanks for watching.